Our movie opens with the news of the death of Leon McCaffrey, one of the biggest international crime bosses. Unfortunately, he has no one to inherit the massive criminal empire he built. But here comes our protagonist, Dan, the true son of Leon McCaffrey, except no one knows that because Dan separated from his father years ago and changed his name so he could live a normal life with his own family. Meanwhile, in New York, we find Dan trying to relive his wild old days. He sneaks into a hotel, but not through the front door like normal people. Nope, Dan climbs up the balconies. He's on the phone with his wife Jessica, who's sitting at the hotel bar. He tells her he left the room key under the table. She quickly grabs it without anyone noticing and heads straight to room 556, exactly as he told her. Once she enters, she finds a gift box waiting on the bed. Inside is a necklace. Before she can pick it up, Dan swings in through the balcony. Turns out all this action is just his idea of celebrating their anniversary, the old way, by letting her experience how he used to live. But right as things get romantic, they get a call from their son, Kylie. Turns out little brother Max has turned the house upside down. Dan gets annoyed. This was supposed to be their moment. But Jessica wants to head home to check on the situation. The next day, the family travels to Jessica's parents' house for the holidays. They also call their older daughter Nina Nicole so she can join them. She recently moved to Paris for a journalism job. When she answers the call, her grandfather casually mentions, "Oh right, wasn't it Leon, the guy you exposed years ago on the news, who died in prison last week?" He says it so casually because no one in the family knows Leon is actually Dan's father, except Jessica and the kids. Jessica quickly changes the subject and apologizes to Dan because no matter what, at the end of the day, Leon was his father. Meanwhile, Max hands Jessica a tablet so she can talk to Nina properly. Nina updates them about work, especially her fitness reporting team. She mentions she got a new opportunity to coach at Ohio State University, but she hasn't told Dan yet because if she accepts, the family would have to move, and Dan is extremely attached to where they live. Nina argues it's time for Dan to sacrifice something too, since Jessica sacrificed for years. Nina also drops another problem. There are no plane tickets for Christmas, so she won't be able to come home. For Dan, that's a disaster. He's obsessed with keeping the family together for the holidays, and everyone seems to think he's overreacting. But to him, family unity is everything. The next day at work, Dan gets an offer from a Paris bank to test their security system. It feels like the perfect excuse, so he tells the family they'll spend Christmas with Nina instead. At first, they're all against the idea, but Jessica backs him up. Any place we're together is home. Once they arrive in Paris, they're supposed to meet Nina at the hotel, but Dan insists on seeing her apartment first. Nina opens the door in shock. They've clearly arrived at a very inconvenient time. Kylie walks to the bathroom, but suddenly rushes out. There's someone in there. A guy walks out wearing just a towel. Dan instantly grabs him, but Nina steps in and explains he's not a stranger, he's her boyfriend, Omar. Her mom looks thrilled. Dan, not so much. He interrogates Omar like he's in court. Job, age, background, accent? Omar answers politely. He's 24, half Moroccan, half French, works as a chef, part-time parkour trainer, sometimes a DJ. Dan can't find a flaw to attack, and to make things worse, Omar is super friendly and starts calling Dan Dad immediately. Later, while touring the city, Kylie asks Omar if he plays video games. Omar says it's his specialty, then suddenly starts flipping and jumping parkour style between fences and walls. Max tries to copy him and eats the pavement. Dan gets mad at Omar, but Omar calms him down and says even his dad let him experiment as a kid. The next morning, Dan tells Jessica he's heading to the bank to test their security system. Once he gets back, the family will finally start their Paris holiday trip together. After Dan leaves, Nina asks her mom if she told him about the Ohio job yet. She warns her that once the holiday trip begins, there won't be much time for a private conversation. Meanwhile, Dan arrives at the Paris bank. At the reception desk, a man shows up and introduces himself as the bank manager, Clary. He asks Dan to try breaking into their security system to evaluate weaknesses. Dan raises an eyebrow. "You want me to stage a robbery?" Then he opens the first door with ease. He had cloned an employee's ID using a scanner hidden in his pocket. Inside the security area, Dan points out that the cameras are outdated and extremely easy for any hacker to override. The laser system is old too. One slap on the sensor shuts it down. Clary is stunned that Dan is moving through the system like it's nothing. Finally, he says he wants Dan to access the safe deposit vault. When an employee tries stopping them, Dan acts with full confidence. "Aren't you Doug? A customer out there is flipping out about you." The poor guy panics and leaves immediately. They reach the final door. Clary claims the vault can only be opened with an ID, which is why Dan conveniently borrowed Doug's badge earlier. Clary is shocked he never noticed his badge being taken. Dan insists Clary enter first. Once inside, Dan grabs him by the collar. "You're not the bank manager. Reception didn't recognize you. Doug didn't know you. So who are you?" Clary begs him to let go, then takes out his phone and shows Dan a picture of Jessica. He reveals no one else could finish this mission besides Dan. If Dan wants his wife back alive, he needs to open deposit box 411 and hand over whatever is inside. Dan opens the box and freezes. Inside is a special key belonging to his late father, a key that unlocks the entire empire Leon McCaffrey left behind. Dan demands answers. Clary pulls out an old photo of him as a child next to Leon, and another boy Dan remembers vaguely from the past. Clary reveals the truth. He isn't the son of a housemaid like the rumors said. He's Leon's son as well, Dan's half-brother. But unlike Dan, Leon refused to acknowledge him or give him his name. Now, Clary wants what he believes is his rightful inheritance, the Empire. He orders Dan to get them out of the bank by any means necessary and warns that even if the police catch Dan, he must not mention Clary, because that's what a brother owes his brother. Dan has no choice. Jessica's life is at stake. He takes Clary hostage at gunpoint as if he's the criminal, then walks him out through security. Outside, a black car waits. Jessica is pushed out and Clary hops in. Dan looks around, police everywhere. He grabs Jessica and they run. But Clary checks his pocket and finds the box empty. The key is gone. Furious, he orders the driver to return to the family's hotel, because if Dan doesn't have the key, one of the kids must. Meanwhile, Nina is chatting with her siblings outside. Omar is relaxing nearby in the garden. Suddenly, their dad calls, "Throw your phones away now. Big problem." Moments later, Dan and Jessica arrive. Clary's car keeps circling the block. Dan gathers them all and they sprint to escape. Jessica, overwhelmed, demands the truth. "More secrets? Your father wasn't enough?" Dan, still shocked himself, insists he knew nothing. Before he can finish, Clary appears behind him, demanding the key. He's not leaving without it. The two brothers clash, man to man, until Clary shifts tactics, seizing Jessica and putting a sharp object to her throat. The key, or she dies. Dan tosses the key into the street, forcing Clary to let Jessica go. Clary dives after it and retrieves it. Later that day, Dan takes the family to a Chinese restaurant owned by an old friend to finally explain everything. He admits he feels sympathy for Clary. Growing up unwanted by Leon must have been hell. Then he hits them with another blow. They need to move away. Immediately, Nina is furious. She built her life in Paris. She's not about to abandon it or Omar. But Omar, being Omar, just shrugs, "I'll go wherever." Problem solved, for him at least. Dan explains why they can't involve the police. Technically, he and Jessica helped rob a bank. They'd both be arrested before anyone believed the real story. With no other option, Dan takes them to a boat. They'll lay low until things calm down. The kids aren't thrilled. They're tired of rebuilding their lives every time Dan's past resurfaces. Even Nina, usually the level-headed one, breaks down. She always dreamed of changing the world, not becoming a fugitive because of her dad's past. Meanwhile, Clary finally uses the key to enter Leon's mansion. Leon's trusted assistant Vikram welcomes him, and once Clary inserts the key into its slot, giant screens rise from the floor, revealing all of Leon's hidden bank accounts. The numbers glow in front of him. For Clary, it feels like justice, like victory. Back with Dan and the family, they dock their boat at a hidden marina. Dan tells them they'll stay a couple of days with one of his old exes. Jessica freezes. Exes? Plural? You lived in Paris? Before she can fully panic, Omar offers to get help from his father. As usual, Dan shuts him down before the sentence finishes. They hop into an old truck, driving through the city until they reach Svetlana's place. On the way, Jessica aggressively mocks the name for about 15 minutes, until she actually sees Svetlana. Turns out, Svetlana is not exactly the glamorous threat Jessica imagined. Her house is basically a cat sanctuary. Once inside, Svetlana drops a bomb. Jessica's face is on the news. The police are actively looking for her for bank embezzlement, which means work is over until further notice. Jessica is shattered. Who would hire a fugitive? Dan then asks Svetlana for help hacking into the new system Leon installed before he died. She's confused. She thought Leon was dead and gone for a while. Dan explains everything: the key, the bank, the half-brother, the hostage situation. Later, Dan tells Jessica that Clary agreed to meet him. Jessica can't understand, what are you even planning to do with him? Dan admits he wants to make peace. Clary's childhood was brutal. Maybe money twisted him. Maybe if someone showed him another road, he'd take it. He believes deep down brothers could still become brothers. They meet at a museum, neutral ground. Clary walks in heavy, carrying years of bitterness. He tells Dan about being 12 years old, standing outside Lion's mansion in the cold all day, watching Dan and Lion leave together. Matching jackets, matching smiles, matching life. Clary thought about running toward them, declaring, "I'm your son too." But after standing still for so long, his legs were frozen, literally unable to move. All he could do was watch them drive away. Dan feels it, that pain. But he tells him the truth. Leon wasn't the father Clary imagined. He wasn't affectionate, he wasn't safe, he wasn't kind. Dan explains how Leon once nearly killed him for disobedience. There was no family bond to defend, just survival. Dan begs him to leave everything behind. If Clary stays in that house, he will eventually become a copy of Leon, and Lion was the last thing anyone should aspire to be. Clary scoffs. Walk away from the Empire and billions? For what? To play cards with a brother I never had? Dan sees the wall. There's no changing him, so he gives a clear warning. Either stop this madness or you'll meet the other side of a McCaffrey. Later, Clary arrives back at the mansion, but not alone. He's hired more than 5 heavy hitters, professionals who specialize in eliminating targets. Whoever kills Dan earns triple pay. That night, Jessica enters the room and finds Dan with Svetlana, who opens a secret wardrobe full of guns, rifles, and ammo, a private arsenal. Jessica instantly understands. The talk with Clary didn't go well. She tells Dan the kids are miserable. They never expected Christmas to look like a fugitive operation. Dan takes them out to distract them. A small night walk through Paris. But things are still tense. When they return, Svetlana invites Dan for a drink, which quickly turns into emotional oversharing. Dan thanks her for helping during a time like this. Suddenly, Svetlana leans back and says, smiling, "I'm such a traitor." She admits she was going to sell Dan out to Clary. Her cats are expensive to feed, and Clary's men are already on their way. Dan realizes the drink was drugged. His legs begin to buckle. He limps toward the room, waking Jessica and the kids before the sedative fully takes over. They panic. Dan's barely conscious, swaying like he's on a sinking ship. Svetlana casually reassures them, he's just sedated. Relax, take the car keys and leave. They throw Kylie into the driver's seat. A terrible choice because the car is a 90s manual and the kid barely knows how to drive. But somehow, miraculously, he crashes through a garage door and they escape just minutes before Clary's men get inside. By the next morning, Dan finally wakes up from the sedative. Jessica is at his side. He admits he really hoped Clary would change, but now there's only one option left. Protect his family and find a way out before they all end up in prison or dead. He considers sending the family somewhere safe while he deals with Clary alone. But Nina refuses. As long as we're together, we're stronger. Splitting up won't fix anything. For the third time, poor Omar suggests asking his father for help. This time, Nina shuts him down. This is family business. You don't want to get dragged in. Dan takes them to a cafe across from his old family home. He tells them the plan. He has to enter the mansion and gain full control of Leon's security system. The kids immediately get distracted by one detail. So that's the house? The giant place that looks like a museum? That's ours? Dan snaps them back to focus. The mansion is covered in cameras and guarded all around. They only have one shot. Kylie hands Dan a flash drive he built. If Dan plugs it into the main system, he'll gain remote control of everything. Omar adds another idea. He can call his friends to stage a protest outside the mansion to distract the guards and confuse the neighborhood. With everything set, Dan tells them the escape rule. If I fail inside, you don't come for me. You run. All of you. Finally, after hours of ignoring him, Dan acknowledges Omar and assigns him a job. Climb with him across rooftops to disable cameras. Omar lights up. It's the moment he officially feels like part of the family. The two hop, rooftop to rooftop, redirecting cameras so they stay pointed away from Dan's entry point. Down below, Omar's friends arrive. Unemployed rebels, drama students, and activists, forming a chaotic protest in front of the mansion. Clary looks out from an upstairs window, baffled. What does the political system have to do with his house? Meanwhile, Nina gets grabbed by police. They think she's the protest leader. Omar jumps onto a car and starts yelling revolutionary slogans at full volume, breaking into the most dramatic speech of his life. The police immediately target him instead. Mission accomplished. Nina is released. Back on the roof, Dan reaches the secret balcony leading to the hidden office Leon once used. The entire room is preserved exactly as he remembered it, like time never moved. Before nostalgia hits too deep, Clary enters with his men behind him. Dan notices the jacket Clary is wearing. That's mine. Clary smirks. Yeah, like the house. He raises his gun, but Vikram stops him. There's a soundproof room for things like this. No need to ruin the furniture. Clary realizes Dan is communicating with his family through a small mic. He rips it off and stomps it. Jessica and the kids can't hear what's happening anymore. They hesitate. Do they leave or help? Jessica decides on a third option. She's going in. Kylie reveals that Dan dropped the flash drive intentionally, a sign for someone else to finish the mission. Jessica climbs to the next rooftop, but the gap between buildings is much wider than expected. She hesitates, reminding herself she once did fitness jumps way bigger than this. She runs, she jumps, she makes it. She grabs the flash drive from the floor and rushes through the mansion halls, searching for the server room. Meanwhile, Clary escorts Dan to the basement. Vikram asks Clary to position him on a very specific spot, the drain. Dan realizes what's coming. He asks Vikram, "Do you think Father would have wanted this?" Before Clary can fire, Vikram hits a switch. The drain opens, and Dan is sucked downward into a water chute. Clary hadn't expected betrayal from this direction. He roars in frustration. Jessica finds the server, plugs in the drive, then hides in a wardrobe when one of Clary's women barges in. But the woman senses her presence. Jessica bursts out. They brawl across the room, smashing furniture until Jessica knocks her out cold with a heavy statue. She runs, tells the kids to head for the American embassy, and escapes the mansion. Clary returns to the control desk and quickly checks the accounts, but every account reads 0. In the quiet of the empty room, he hears footsteps. Dan stands there, soaked from the water chute, bruised, but alive. No more running. They chase each other until they break through a doorway leading to the roof of a cathedral surrounded by giant bells. Dan tries one final time. "This doesn't have to end like this. We can start fresh, brothers." Clary refuses. There is no universe where he lets go. Dan uses the bell rope, loops it around Clary's leg, and kicks him off the ledge, leaving him dangling mid-air. Moments later, police finally swarm the scene. Dan is cuffed and loaded into a van. Outside, the family waits, also cuffed, also arrested, waiting to see how this all ends. On their way to the precinct, Kylie reveals what he did. He transferred all the money from Leanne's accounts to a charity organization. Nina beams with pride. Jessica is stunned. Max is confused but supportive. Suddenly, a line of black cars parks in front of them. A man steps out. It's Omar, but behind him stands his father, the Secretary General of Interpol. Dan freezes. "You know, that seems like information we should have known earlier." Omar shrugs. He tried mentioning it several times. Dan just never listened. Jessica finally tells Dan about the Ohio job offer, and instead of resisting, he lights up with excitement. For once, the future looks normal. 6 months later in Ohio, Dan video calls Omar, who can't make it for Christmas. After the call, Dan and Jessica head out to meet Nina and Kylie, arriving home for the holidays. A month later, Dan visits Clary in prison. He brings him a jacket matching his own. Then he pulls out a deck of cards. The two brothers sit quietly and finally play together.